So we mentioned the two egregious cases out of Thurston County this week with judges who I don't know what they should be doing, but I don't think they should be deciding whether violent criminals get out or not because they've proven incapable of that. So we wanted to have Representative Travis Couture on the show, who's been very vocal about this issue, and also yesterday, he went to tour McNeil Island, which is the island where we put the worst of the worst sex offenders, because there's been a lot of controversies at the state level around what to do with those people, because the state's been shipping them out to communities to live in less secure facilities, like right next to bus stops and stuff. So we thought it was a good opportunity to invite him on to talk not only about what's happening with some of these cases in Thurston County, but also to talk about the tour of McNeil Island he had yesterday. Representative Couture, welcome back to Undivided.
Hey, thanks for having me, Brandi.
Yeah, what the hell is happening in Thurston County Superior Court these days?
Yeah, it seems crazy, but apparently, they don't like bail in Thurston County Superior Court. So, yeah, we have had a couple incidents in Thurston County, touching my district, and one of them was a car chase that ended up with the person being apprehended, and then he was released on no bail. And then another incident where a man was repeatedly raping his daughter for like 5 years, and got charged with first degree rape and essentially walked out of the court with $1,000 in bail, and is now walking the streets as we speak.
Yeah, and all just for the sake of us not getting sued, allegedly, innocent until proven guilty. But I know that there was a lengthy investigation
Sure, they're a suspect. Yeah.
into it before he was ultimately charged. So we've been talking about both of these instances. We have also, as have you. You blasted out the names of the two judges involved on social media. Why'd you make the decision to do that?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that. Well, I think what most people maybe don't understand, and they should, or they forget about, is that a lot of judges in our state are elected officials. We elect them. And just like people elect me, and I'm held accountable for the votes that I take and the bills that I pass or run, any elected official in this state, whether you be a state representative or a school board member or a judge, or a prosecutor, has to be held accountable for the decisions that they make for the community and their constituents. And so a lot of people they get really confused when they're voting on judges. What is that judge's record? It's not ultimately clear what decisions they've made in the past. And so as we talk about keeping our community safe and promoting public safety, the courts and the judicial system and the legal system has a part to play in keeping our streets safe. It's not just law enforcement. That's just the first step. And so it's important to me that when people make radical, out of touch, tone deaf decisions with dangerous people, putting them back on our streets, that they're held accountable. And if it were me to do it, my name would be used. And so I don't see why. I think it's totally fair to use the names of judges and prosecutors who fail to help us keep our streets safe.
Yeah, I think it's a solid argument when it comes to these are elected officials. And if we treat all people who are on a ballot the same, that there's accountability for their actions. I've sort of hesitated to name judges when they're in the midst of a trial, for instance, because I don't want anybody emailing or harassing them in a way that might derail a trial. But these are first appearance judges in these instances. And so I'll just name them again. Judge Sharonda Amamilo. Do you know how to pronounce that? Am I doing my best job?
I think that's close.
Yeah. And then Judge Allison Zip. Allison Zip was the judge who set the 18-year-old free on no bail. And Sharonda Amamio was the judge who let the accused child rapist go with $10,000 bail. I guess from your perspective as a lawmaker, what can you really do? I mean, how could you, if at all, legislate around bad judges? Because they do have judicial discretion. It's a different branch of our system, and they need to operate independently. Can you think of any ways legislatively that this could be reined in?
Yeah, so legislatively, we already separate. If you were to look at state law, you would see a matrix of what is considered violent crime, what is, there's, different tiers of crimes, and how the seriousness of those crimes, right? And, if you're shoplifting or something, I mean, yeah, that's bad, but that's a lot different than first degree rape or you know, going on a 100-mile-an-hour chase and running from police, right? And so there's different levels to crimes, and you know, personally, I would like to see that, especially. It seems like we have more activist judges in certain parts of our state, not in all. I mean, in certain counties, maybe it's not the same, but at the same time, you could see the hot areas where crime is existing and that this is a huge problem, right? And it's in our urban areas. And you know, I would like to entertain something like a minimum bail requirement, right, for certain violent or dangerous people and crimes, right? Especially, you know, you're supposed to look at like prior offenses and stuff like that, and it doesn't seem like those are really weighing in when you've got people who continue to go through this revolving door of committing crimes and then getting released, committing crimes, getting released, and sometimes judges aren't following the, you know, the rules that have been established for them. Like a case we talked about a while back in Mason County in my district, where a woman shot her boyfriend and then was released on like $5,000 bail for aggravated assault. And she was obviously mentally ill. Well, when she got released, she went and jumped off the high steel bridge in Shelton and killed herself. So there was no justice for the victim, and there was no punishment for the suspect, right? Or no court. There was no anything. And so everyone loses, right? And in that particular case with Judge Katie Ferguson Brown, there was no competency evaluation ordered. I mean, just blatant violations of the rules. And so it kind of breaks down, Brandi, I think, if I'm being honest, to a worldview. Do we protect victims of crimes and the innocent law-abiding people on our streets and provide them public safety? Are we prioritizing those people, or are we prioritizing and coddling the criminals or the suspects of crimes, right? And what happens is when we coddle those people, there is no deterrence in our law, right? There's no deterrence in our system. So it just emboldens criminals and people who want to commit crimes to do more because they know that there's going to be no punishment.
Yeah, and I couldn't agree more. And no county is untouched by this. You mentioned that briefly, but a lot of these judges we've been talking about lately, they initially got on the bench because they were appointed by Jay Inslee. He's been the governor for 11 years, will be 12 years. A lot of our judges are Inslee appointees. And so you know, and then they run and they're unopposed. And it's like, okay, well, what do we do about that? I mean, I know this isn't an election related interview, but I think that you put a Republican in the governor's office to sort of right the ship a little bit, but that is a conversation for another time. We wanted to have you on yesterday, Representative, but you were out on McNeil Island, where our state houses sexually violent predators. What led to that tour that you took yesterday?
Yeah, so it was a legislative tour that, and there was, I would say 15, 20 of us, a rough guess of how many legislators and staff went on the tour. And it was about equally split, you know, Democrat, Republican. And so it was a tour of the entire island, including the Special Commitment Center, which is run by DSHS for the sexually violent predators. And then also the Pierce County SCTF, which is literally just right next to the SEC, because McNeil Island is technically Pierce County. And so we got to tour those things, and it gets complicated, but what really spurned it was my third day in office. Here I am, just trying to get my wheels under me, and I start getting hundreds of emails about SVPs and everything else. And I mean, if you don't live that world, you just really don't know. And so I had to figure out what an SVP even was. And but it's a sexually violent predator. We're talking the worst of the worst. This is not your run-of-the-mill sex offender. These are atrociously violent and honestly very disturbing crimes that these people have committed. And once they're not incarcerated anymore, but when they were getting out of prison, they have an end of sentencing review where a team decides, hey, are you likely to reoffend with these violent sex crimes? And if that answer is yes, then they get that moniker, sexually violent predator, and they can then be civilly committed to McNeil Island or one of the, well, it starts with McNeil Island, but it then can go into something called a less restrictive alternative, which is really just, a home placement, right? If we're being honest. And there's a complicated web of responsibility when it comes to how these people are released. But what really spurred it on is that DSHS, through a state law, a couple of years before I was elected, basically enacted a fair share rule where they are going to start releasing and spreading sexually violent predators throughout all the, most of the various counties in Washington state. And of course, that landed in my district in Tenino, where they were planning at one point to put 11 sexually violent predators in a 3-bedroom bungalow in a residential area with playgrounds and a summer camp and all sorts of stuff. And honestly, Brandi, as a state representative now, I get a lot of emails and contact with constituents of all stripes, Democrat, Republican, Independent, whatever they may be. And when I have, dozens and dozens of people who live next to that proposed LRA in Tenino, which, with joint partnership with Thurston County, we got kicked out of my district. And I'm proud of that because there was dozens of people that said, Representative, I've been sexually assaulted. I was raped. I'm scared. I'm scared that these people are moving in next to me. And these are not even just regular rapists. These are the worst of the worst. And that hit me so hard at home. And I've just been fighting it ever since. And we had 3 bills, me and my seatmate, Representative Dan Griffey, and we didn't get hearings on them, but we created quite a stir. We, with a partnership with Representative Stokesbury, we got some language into the budget, but then the governor vetoed it because it would have provided public notice, which I think is like the bare minimum we should expect. But he vetoed it, saying that it was administratively burdensome. And then honestly, our tribes right now have a huge problem, a big disparity with missing and murdered Indigenous women.
Yeah.
And up in the Enumclaw area, they already have a sex predator house LRA up there. And so they're very concerned about it as well.
Yeah, and you'd mentioned, I think what were really 2 victories for communities, because one of those houses got put in Enumclaw, really close to a school bus stop. Thankfully, Stephen Knapp, and we haven't updated this on the show yet, so we probably should, the guy who was there who had done some horrendous things to teen girls and was just a predator, he is now, I believe, back on McNeil Island because he had some violations of the conditions of his release, so he's not in that house anymore. And then, as you mentioned, you parents in Tenino, you guys raised enough hell for that house not even to be able to open as one of these less restrictive facilities. So what were you hoping to learn by going out to McNeil Island?
Yeah, my personal view, and I think I share this view with like a vast majority of my constituents, is that we want these sexually violent predators to remain exactly where they are in McNeil Island. And so I'm looking when I'm there to see the state of the Special Commitment Center and the SETF that's there,
SETF?
The Secure Community Transition Facility is essentially a more secure LRA, not like the one they would have put in Tenino, but this one has cameras and 24/7 staff and all sorts of stuff, right? But it's a little bit less restrictive than the Special Commitment Center, which is kind of close to, in my view, to like a juvenile hall, maybe a little bit cushier. So I'm looking to see, is this place secure? Do they have beds? And they weren't full. So they have room at the Special Commitment Center and at the SETF. But state law has really kind of hand tied where DSHS, they don't actually necessarily say who can get released. That's the SVP's defense attorney and the courts, right? So if they got a good attorney, they can get released. And sometimes, as we learned yesterday, high acuity sexually violent predators get released and against the better judgment of DSHS because their attorneys and the courts have released them. And DSHS's role is to find basically create a release plan, an LRA plan. It's like a 90-day plan. Here's where we're going to go. And of course, they got to go into, because of the fair share in the laws, they got to go into the community and establish this housing, right?
Yeah.
But people don't, and they can say, people will say NIMBYism for this kind of stuff, but honestly, when you've got people telling you I was raped and sexually assaulted, I'm a survivor of sexual assault. That's not NIMBYism. That's just wanting to feel safe where you live. And that's a huge difference between, I don't want that kind of house next door to me, right? And
Right.
so there's a difference. I really caution people to say public safety is NIMBYism. It's not. You should feel safe where you live, period.
Yeah,
Full
and I would
stop.
challenge any parent to say, oh, yeah, put that guy who molested young girls 50 yards from the bus stop where my kid waits for the bus. I'm totally fine with that. I think that's ridiculous until it happens to them, right? It's easy for them to say, oh, yeah, let's do it until it happens to them. I want to end with what you're going to turn all of this experience into in terms of proposed legislation this coming session. But I want to bring something up that I know is never popular when we talk about these types of predators, but I always have a struggle sometimes with McNeil Island and my belief in the Constitution and the fact that, this is the United States. And so can we really civilly commit someone who's already served their prison sentence for the rest of their life to an island without giving them ample opportunity to be able to be folded back into society? So for you, what's the balance there between someone's constitutional rights, which I know you take seriously as well, and, the safety risk that they pose to our community?
Yeah, that's a great question. Like I said, they finished their incarceration. They're not a prisoner anymore, but they've been deemed civilly committed. They've been civilly committed because they've been deemed that they will reoffend given the chance, right? And to really answer this, you got to go back in history a bit before we had these civil commitments. People were getting released from prison. Everyone knew that they were going to go out and do terrible things. And then there was no law to really civilly commit them or anything like that, or to stop them. So that's exactly what happened. They got out of prison and then did more crimes against people. And so, voters decided we wanted to have McNeil Island as the place where we do civilly commit them. So it's kind of like almost a democratic process, like a will of the people thing. But at the same time, yeah, they do have rights. I mean, they're civilly committed and they have to, so they have most of their rights. I mean, they can still vote, right? But at the same time, that's why there's this less restrictive alternatives, because the multiple times the Supreme Court and all the courts have said these civil commitments are constitutional. But now the question is, how restrictive can you get within that civil commitment and still have it be constitutional? So that's why there's these less restrictive alternatives. But as I pointed out, there is the Secure Community Transition Facility right next door, basically, to the Special Commitment Center on McNeil Island. That is a less restrictive alternative in state law. It has cameras and staff and stuff to be there, but really, as you go through, this is a nicer home than some people in my district have, right? And we can have personal feelings about how we feel about that. But at the end of the day, I think what matters the absolute most to people is that they're located in a place where they can't do damage to us. And so we can still keep them on McNeil Island, respect their civil liberties that they have. If I were king for a day, I would create more LRAs on McNeil Island like that SETF. I think that was appropriate, a level of security, and also appropriate level of freedom for them being civilly committed, in my eyes. And they're expensive, and some people will complain about the cost, but you can't really put a price tag on people's safety and their security, right? And so we spent over $100 billion, federal and state money in our state budget. And so really creating another SCTF to house these people and make sure that there's room and a less restrictive alternative away from a society where they can harm people, I think is just a drop in the bucket for our state budget.
Yeah.
And I think we shouldn't put a price tag on that kind of safety.
Yeah, although earlier you used the word cushy to describe your impression of one of those houses on the island. I don't love the word cushy when it comes to where pedophiles are living on the taxpayer dime. However, I digress. So let's end with this, Representative Travis Couture. What is going to be your priority when it comes to crafting bills to address the issues created by all of this?
Yeah. So number one, and I'll be running this again, we need to have public notice.
Yeah.
The governor, when I met with him, they were very nervous about public notice. He vetoed some public notice in the law in the budget that we tried to put in. We can't do this, especially, I mean, you got the UTC thing with the AG's office. I mean, we need transparency in government right now, right? People have the right to know what their government is up to. And if you are going to cite an LRA in the community that is going to house, a multitude of violent sex predators, and that's the government's function, not only should we just have as a basic rule that we're going to be accountable and transparent about that process with the community and our constituents, but now it's almost like, hey, we have to hide it or else they're going to find out and they're going to be mad. Well, they're going to find out anyway, and they're going to be even more mad, just like they tried to do in Tenino. And so I just don't understand that thought process. We have to be transparent. So number one is public notice. We have to have it, and we have to have discussions with people in our community. And the second big thing I'm looking at, which is a lot broader, is basically doing a moratorium on the placement or basically the contracting of new LRAs in our communities, which essentially is just put a pause on what we're doing right now. Because even as DSHS and other stakeholders involved, I think everyone recognizes there's a lot of loopholes here and a lot of issues that need to be worked out. Whether you agree with in-community placement or not, there is a lot of problems to work out. DSHS can't even go into some of their non-contracted LRAs to go see their SVPs at any point in time. The property owners are saying pound sand, right? And that's a huge problem. They need to be 24/7 access to those people. And so basically put a moratorium, a couple of years, get everybody in the table and really start working out how this is going to work. And the way I'm trying to do it is doing it in a way in which promotes the public safety and reassures them that they're going to be safe, that they're properly cited, that local governments have a chance to weigh in on the citing, which they really don't right now, and really giving everybody at the table a voice, which is what our government should be about. Everyone should have a voice at the table, especially with super consequential issues like this.
Yeah, and this is common sense stuff, like you said. And I was happy to see, I saw on Twitter, one of your fellow colleagues in Olympia, a Democrat, Mari Levitt, who said, "Hey, good to see you at the tour yesterday. Let's get good work done." And I was like, "See, I hope you guys can come together on some of this, because I just fail to see the politics involved in it. It's just like, this is really basic, sane, common sense stuff that we should be doing."
We have to be able to work together on things, and there's obviously some politicians in Olympia that kind of sit on the fringe, right? But you have to be able to work on things with people and find reasonable people to do them with. And, Representative Levitt, we have some disagreements, of course, but she's one of the, I would say, if I'm being honest, one of the more reasonable Democrats in the House. I mean, my seatmate and I and her, we worked together on a fentanyl pill press bill to give cops, the ability to hammer people who manufacture tens of thousands of fentanyl pills. So we're doing more fentanyl legislation with her coming next year and hopefully in the years to come. And then also she's going to be helping me out with hopefully with some of this SVP LRA stuff too. So it's really good to sometimes you set aside some of the more guttural things and you can work on what makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And we try to do that a lot. And I'll just give her a hat tip, and even though that won't make my party happy, but I'll give her a hat tip and say she's one of the better ones from the other caucus in the House, and I really enjoyed working with her.
Yeah, and we'll reach out to her too and invite her on the show to talk about this issue as well. So, Representative Travis Couture, we really appreciate you taking the time and appreciate you caring about these issues. And I know you have so many constituents who are grateful that you've been out there fighting for them on some of these things.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate it.